All right, joining me on the final word today is a man who opens the batting with distinction at Old Trafford, having started his life and professional career in South Africa. He's played 17 Test matches for England, which included a century on debut back in 2016. Across his first-class career, he's amassed more than 11,000 runs with 31 centuries. A man who has a claim on being the most effective player in England since COVID. It's Lancashire skipper Keaton Jennings. Welcome to the show.
Cheers, Adam. Thank you for having me, mate. Thank you for the intro as well. Very kind.
Indeed. Look, this is the third in a series of these interviews we've done. We did one with Sam Robson, one with Jack Leach, and now one with you. And I've basically started all of them the same in relation to that special feeling that one gets in April when the season's starting. And in your case, as I'm pretty sure when we put this out, it'll be day one of the season when you've got Jimmy Anderson to push around as your opening bowler at Lords against Middlesex. That'll be fun.
Yeah, that won't be the worst. Although I've got to catch them a second slip, which is yeah, you kind of have nightmares over. But yeah, look, it's that time of year where everything is nice and anxious. You're nice and tense. You kind of going into a new season. Everything's fresh. I said to my wife yesterday, actually, I was like, how do you kind of calm yourself? Because you've done it for so long, but you're like, it's the same anxieties every year. Like, will I have a bad year? How do you try and kind of get the ball rolling again? Like, what did I do last year that was good? What did I do badly? So it's the same sort of anxieties, the same anxieties you feel as a 10-year-old pulling your pads on waiting to go and bat. So it's exciting, man. It's awesome.
Are you still the kind of guy who has that boyhood enthusiasm that one might have had when they were growing up and strapping the pads on for junior cricket?
Oh, absolutely. So we've been out to Desert Springs last week, and we had a middle session. So myself and Mikey Jones got pulled to face Jimmy and a couple of the other lads. So I ran off, did our warm up, we did like sort of match scenario, ran off, went to go to the bathroom, and it was the same anxiety feeling, stood there trying to like go to the bathroom when you kind of getting ready to go and do your job, and that's in a
Mm.
practice game. So it's exactly the same. It's the same feelings as I had 15, 20 years ago.
I mentioned you'll have Jim and it'll be against Middlesex at Lords. I suppose in theory you wouldn't want to be playing Middlesex because you got relegated at the end of last season. But from your perspective as leader of the club, the job's an obvious one, right? Bounce back and try and give yourself every chance of being in Division One next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also we didn't play our best cricket last year. I think we have to accept that. The club is a big club, but also you have to play consistently good cricket. Staying in Division One or getting out of Division Two isn't guaranteed. There's no sort of hard and fast rules in life. You have to perform week in, week out, year in, year out in order to be a big, successful club. So yeah, the first time of asking is the main objective is to get up, but we have to play good cricket come. Geez, what day is it today? Monday. So we have to come play good cricket from Friday.
Busy winter for you in different ways to normal, right? I mean, the Big Bash League, I got to say, I didn't. I know you've had a productive short form career as well in England, but I didn't see that one coming. I mean, what was it like for you in Australia playing in the English winter? And have you had many opportunities to play in Australia before? And I guess having a toe in the T20 domestic circuit now as well.
Yeah, look, I think I've been across a couple of times playing for the Lions. We had the tour just before COVID. I had a tour on the Lions as like a sort of under the Ashes, where they take a group of sort of 15 or 20 out with Andy Flower. So we actually went to WA that trip as well and went back to the same field where Andy Flower got stuck into me a few times trying to change a few bits technically. So that brought back some nice memories. Um, but no, look, I mean, the whole experience with the WA lads in with the Scorchers was awesome. The sort of family feeling you get as soon as you walk into the Wacker, the way Mel and Macca and Voji sort of look after you, I think is absolutely fantastic. The way Cooper Connolly reeled off their sort of family values at the first training session.
Mm.
I think just sort of spoke volumes with how they want to go about their cricket and their sort of culture, which I love, man. Obviously, frustrating not to play more, but to be a part of it and to be in and around such a successful franchise was absolutely amazing.
You've had this streak for the last 5 years that we'll go into a little bit later in the interview, having posted big numbers year in, year out in the county championship. But I guess for all modern players that have different decisions to make about different formats of the game, where do you see that for you personally about how you might try and balance 4-day cricket with 20 over cricket?
Um, to be fair, I love four-day cricket. I love the feeling you get when you've won the game, you're sitting in your whites. cap on backwards, having a beer with your mates after 4 hard days graft. That feeling is so hard to replicate in anything else. Winning a T20 game is amazing, but that high and low is over so quickly. Um, I'd love to play more sort of winter franchise leagues. That would be amazing. So to do both, I think would be sort of my ideal. Obviously playing on 100 and then kind of search for more opportunities in the winter, and try and balance, I suppose, a life outside of cricket. I'm
Mm.
not 21 anymore. I'm moving towards the second half of my career. So to try and balance the opportunities with half an eye outside of the game, I think will be an interesting balance over the next few years. But I mean, it's amazing where cricket is. You've had, what's it, 500 million quid come into the game, and it just shows the movement of direction.
I guess for you personally, moving around and being resourceful is something that you've shown at an early age, a willingness to do. I think for people who might be listening in different parts of the world, they may not know your story that well, having grown up in Johannesburg and played cricket in South Africa at professional level. Your old man having been a player in South Africa through a really challenging time in the country's history through apartheid, and before you decided to move to England and advance your career. But yeah, just going back to that family connection and having been born in 1992, your life would have been very different had you been born rather in 1972 or
Yeah.
1962, when you wouldn't have had anywhere near the opportunities you have today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my dad will tell you he only played on green wickets for the Wanderers, so his first class runs were worth triple, if not more. So he'll tell you a bit of that. But no, look, I've been very lucky with the way I've grown up. My dad played on 160 odd first class games. My uncle played, my brother played. So I've grown up in an environment where one, we've been uber competitive, but two, there's been an exposure to cricket, which I've absolutely loved. And then obviously got to 18. I felt like there was going to be more opportunities coming over to England. I was blessed with a mum that was born in Sunderland. So got on the plane, came across to landed in London, got the train up to the northeast and arrived very early April to no leaves on the trees and Johnny Windows, the old academy director, stood at Durham train station. So that was a rude awakening. But I mean, look, I've loved the journey I've had since then. There were some tough times. You leave home as an 18-year-old with no return date. I think can play on your mind a bit. But I mean, I've had mates for the last 15 years that were the best men at my wedding. So I've been very lucky and very blessed with the people I met along the way.
I had this same conversation, very similar conversation with Sam Robson. He did a
I can
similar
imagine.
thing at the same part of his youth when he played for the Australian 19s. Well, you captained the
Yeah.
South African 19s. He'd had a chance to have a domestic career in Australia, potentially. You were having one in South
Mm.
Africa. Indeed, it looks like you were a little bit further advanced than he was at the same time, roughly. Was there,
Yeah.
I mean, there probably was a South African career somewhere for you in the future, but you chose to go to England. Just talk us through that decision making rubric at the time and not trying to push through having made it to the top of youth cricket in South Africa.
Yeah, so I finished the equivalent of A levels, so matric, as it is in South Africa. I did really nicely. I got 6 distinctions out of 7 subjects, so I had the grades to go and study to be a sort of doctor or engineer, so a high level sort of degree. But I wanted to play cricket, and I felt at the time you got 6 franchise teams in South Africa, you had 18 teams here,
Mm.
and I just felt like the opportunity in order to break through as a professional player here would not necessarily be easier, but I felt if you played good cricket, the opportunities would be there for you. So I moved across, and I'm very thankful for it. South Africa is an amazing place. I've still got family and friends there. But for me at the time, I had to look at it objectively and say, I want to play cricket. And I felt like coming to England was my best opportunity. And if that failed, I can study anywhere in the world.
Mm.
So yeah, at that point in time, I mean, it was tough. You turn your back on loved ones, mum, dad, which I suppose at 18 is actually quite cool. You jump across the world to Newcastle and have some amazing nights out and make some good mates. But I suppose you don't realize actually what the big bad world is at that point in time until you start sort of putting out some roots.
So I mean that it is yeah. The more I hear you talk about it, the more interesting it is, isn't it? Because you had the academic results to do whatever you wanted,
Mm.
and I know you've gone on to do further study as well. MBA,
Yeah.
am I right in saying you've done in more recent years? So you've always was it an MBA you did a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I did an undergrad in business and then did an MBA. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very, very lucky. Langs kind of pushed me and helped me out with that. But yeah, no, I enjoyed it.
But I mean, this idea of you, even at that age, kind of realizing that, yeah, I might make it. I might end up being a test cricketer, or I might not. And I'll need
Yeah,
to, it's a bit old school, right? Like that's the attitude that players maybe 10, 20 years older than you, they took the approach that this can't be relied upon forever. The wages in the domestic game aren't enough to sustain you alone. And they had second careers where most players now don't go down that path, and they're very much invested in trying to make it as a superstar cricketer, whereas you kind of kept that
100%.
foot in both camps.
100%. I think actually the MBA helped me to view my cricket completely differently, if that makes sense. I think at the time, when I moved over when I was 18, I made my dad the promise I'd get a degree. Obviously, he's very old school. I mean, you'll know the narrative around my dad. He was
Mm.
old school. He would throw you in an ice bath at the end of the day's play. He would make the whole team do a lap around the field for a no ball. He was fairly old school. But the one thing he made me promise him was getting a degree. I did that 9 years after moving across, which in hindsight, after having done the MBA a couple of years later, I realized that it was actually a really nice distraction and a really nice way to get away from nicking off in the first over. And I'm sure Robbo chatted about that. The toughness of having opening the batting in England is hard work. So to have that avenue to actually distract your mind is actually quite nice.
Mm. Yeah, and to do it up in Durham as well. I mean, you talk
Yeah,
about green tops at the Wanderers, Durham having been notoriously a great place to bowl fast, especially in the era that you're coming through there initially playing from from 2011 onwards,
yeah,
and starting that residency process thereafter and making a debut not long after that as well. And yeah, as we said before, signing that piece of paper that gives up the chance of playing for South Africa, and you are now fully committed to England and the
yeah.
England system. And the idea of having to take some time and really find your way in a new country, it's not easy for any young person moving somewhere else. And I suppose that's reflected in the fact that it took you a couple of years to work out where you were going as a cricketer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also you try and work out which way you're going. You try and adapt your game. Obviously, grew up in Joburg. Conditions were completely different to Durham. It was slightly warmer. Could understand the people around me as well. But I think when I look back, I was very lucky with the people I had around me. So Del Benkenstein, our current head coach at Lancs, he was one of the senior players there. Gareth Breeze, Callum Thorpe, Harmy, Graham Onions, Michael Di Venuto. Mark Stoneman. So you had some really old guys that were nailed down, had their skill nailed down, and some high quality human beings. And when I look back on those couple of transition years, to actually sit around, have a beer with those guys, and sort of throw yourself into an environment, I think fast track that in a lot of ways. I think if you come over and you sort of scrap around and you don't have that around you, I think it might be a little bit tougher to try and actually break through.
Right, right, and with that infrastructure in place, when you do start to click, there's the chance to go really big. And that remarkable
100%.
season of 2016, that was probably the first year I was really covering the county championship. I was here in 15,
Mm.
but 16's where I was sort of in, week out, and you were
Yeah.
rattling off ton after ton, seven of them across the season, averaging 65 and making over 1,500 first class runs. I mean, they're absurd numbers in any context in recent years. You lead the competition for runs. You're the county player of the year. Great white ball season as well. You've just qualified for England at the start of that
Yeah.
season in April 2016, and suddenly you're in a position where things can open up. But that experience of it starting to really click and knowing that you had the game to play at the very top of it.
Yeah, I think the bit I would add to that as well, I was actually in my final year in that 2016, and I think I've always been the kind of guy that's overanalyzed, overthought, over kind of trained, overdone everything to try and make sure I don't leave any stone unturned. And I think maybe the pressure of moving into my final year, it could be my last year in England,
Mm.
the unknown of that actually made me relax, and made me just go and enjoy playing cricket. And I think the periods of time when I look back at I've had success, I think for me I've enjoyed playing, I've enjoyed life outside of it, rather than just go back, study, get things done, get back into the nets, gym. I've actually really enjoyed playing in the process of being a player and a
Right.
cricketer.
I mean, that's a nice way of seeing it, because a lot of people get to the top and they're a little bit knackered, right? Like they've had to fight tooth and nail to drag themselves
Yeah,
into the test team. And it can apply to politicians as well who get to the very
Yeah.
top when they've already been there so long, they're so broken and battered down. But kind of not for you. You have that big season, and at the end of the year in December 2016, called into the Test squad in India, and then go on to make a famous century on Test debut. Any century on Test debut is a famous one, and you were the 19th Englishman to achieve that feat. Only what 8 months after you were eligible to play. I mean,
Yeah.
a pretty remarkable thing. I mean, you must look back on that. I know that where you're at with England now, and we'll come to that
Mm.
later, is a probably more complicated space. But just looking back on something that happened so quickly, and that you were able to do something that so few have done.
Yeah, I think the bits I remember from that, nice, the knock itself was awesome. But I think when I look back at some of the conversations, sitting and having a beer with Andy Flower, who told me I'd been picked a couple of days before traveling out to Mumbai. We were in Dubai at the time with the Lions.
Mm.
I can still remember having a conversation with him. I cherish that moment, telling my folks, telling my best mate, telling my family. So it's those moments around that week that I think for me are so special. Um, I think the success comes and goes, as I mean, we'll probably chat about in a bit. It's the highs and lows of cricket, and that's why I say objectively, when I sit back and I look at actually was I enjoying that period of time, I really was at that point in time, because I didn't have any mental scarring. I wasn't trying to fight anything or trying to fight myself within my journey. I was actually just a naive kid to a degree, enjoying playing cricket for that period of time. But yeah, no, look, it was amazing. I look back with some amazing memories.
And to like walk into a dressing room that would have felt so foreign, I guess, because you're only able to play in it only a short time before, and there's some outstanding cricketers who you stepped out across the line with in Mumbai, and
Mm.
look, England cricket and India, a complex relationship. It's been rare for success to come for England batters in recent times, and you're one of
Yeah.
only a handful who has had some success in that part of the world pretty consistently when you've gone to Asia, and you had the game to meet those challenges right away.
Yeah, to be fair, I worked really hard with Andy Flower and Graham Thorpe on that trip to Dubai. I've never been notoriously a great player of spin. I can remember Cheaton Patel bowling to me one of my first seasons up at the Riverside. And I mean, he bowls like quick off spin,
Mm.
really good. I really struggled with him. And at that point, I had a sort of dab sweep and a sort of lean back knock to point that every now and again I'd beat back with point. I remember bowling a bit of a drag down. I mean, I won't swear, but he went, that's a ball to a cricketer. And I remember at the time thinking, yeah, you're probably right. Like, yeah, fair, because I have nothing to push back to you. And Andy Flower worked quite hard on developing a bit of a sweep, a reverse sweep, picking of length. So to then directly translate those learnables from the nets to go out to India, I think I've got to credit him with quite a lot of it, and Graham Thorpe. So look, it's still skills that I try and develop now, because I think the game's only moving one way. You watch guys, I mean, Ruti reverse paddling seamers. It's absolutely nuts. So
Mm.
trying to keep developing that skill and try and stay on top of it.
Clearly a fast learner, having gone from a Lions tour where you've got two shots to making 100 in Mumbai is a pretty wild career arc, I guess. But clearly something that you'll always have to look back on, and always have. It'll always be part of your story, right? 100 on debut, and it propels you into the next home summer. And the sadness, I guess, from a personal perspective, that you play against your old country, South Africa, in 4 Test matches, and it doesn't quite go to plan. Felt like at the time you were turning a corner of sorts in that last Test at the Oval, but I guess selection is a weird old thing at times, and they'd already made their mind up, I suppose. But yeah, South Africa, would you assume they had a bit of an extra edge when bowling to you in that series, knowing that you were of their stock originally?
No, I don't think so. I think when I look back, you had Philander, Rabada, Morkel. They were all in the top 10 in the world.
Mm.
I think Morkel, if I'm not mistaken, I think he bowled 4 bounces the whole series. And for a guy that is traditionally known to bowl sort of that length, he pushed his length fuller. Philander was, I mean, that game at the Oval was just, it was nuts. I think Stokesy
Mm.
got 100. It was nuts to watch, man. But actually, I think for me, I went into that series quite tense. I hadn't got a lot of runs off the back of it that summer. And I've actually still got the notes. Philander bowled me a ball at Trent Bridge and nipped back. I said nipped back, it probably straightened. Missed it, bowled me. And I remember writing notes and trying to like get my thoughts down onto a piece of paper. And I've still got them. And it just showed me how fragile I was at that point in time, how intense I was to try and nitpick at everything. And every now and again, when I feel myself moving that way, I go and read those notes. Um, but like, I think objectively at that point in time, I probably didn't quite have the skill set to put any pressure back onto the bowler, to put any sort of doubt in his head that he couldn't just keep landing the ball in an area. Couple that with three guys that are arguably the best in their trade at that point in time, made it fairly hard work for me.
Isn't it sad when you hear something like that, right? That oftentimes cricketers are picked for international honours when they're quite young, like early 20s,
Mm,
mid 20s, something like that. When the mental side of their game doesn't reach its peak till they're well and truly into their 30s. If only those
yeah,
two things to be married up more often. I know it's hard because oftentimes as a selector you're looking for the next big thing,
yeah.
and that would have informed why they were going to you when they did, given the red hot form you were in 2016. But if you had the powers that you enjoy now and the experiences that you've got now, and could put that into that younger bloke in 2017, how much better off you'd be for it?
Yeah, I'd like to think I'd be better off for it. Whether my performances would be better, I suppose you can argue yes and no. I mean, there's technical things you can look at and always poke holes at.
Hmm.
I know in myself, emotionally, I'd be so much better off. I know I wouldn't have had the sleepless nights I had. Like at one point, I remember I had a little like sort of tray of coffee, an espresso pods on the wall, and I remember I couldn't make the decision of which coffee to choose, like the light roast, the dark roast, and just because mentally I was so bogged down in my own head that I couldn't actually shift through what was just going on in a simple choice. I felt like I was under so much pressure that for me at that point in time was just too much. Where now I'd probably sort of be sad that night, come home, have a chat, probably chill outside, have a glass of wine or a beer, crack on again tomorrow. I'll try again, and I know that I've put the work in. But like you say, it's that mentality of being early 30s rather than mid 20s and
Yeah.
do slightly more happy.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that sounds so taxing, so emotionally taxing with something that's meant to be, the
Fun.
happiest time in your life. There was a cat.
Absolutely.
There was a cat presentation. We were in Gaul recently doing a test series, and Simon Kadich was handing out the
Yeah, I
cap to
watched
Cooper
it.
Connolly,
Yeah.
and he regaled Cooper Connolly with what Richie Benaud said to him when he got his cap about enjoy it. That's what it boils down to. You've got to try and
Yeah.
find a way to enjoy it, and it is a reminder that for players when they get there, it can often be a difficult experience to enjoy. Maybe you're enduring it
Mm,
more, knowing that the degree of difficulty is so high, and so it applies in the next year when you go to Lancashire, make runs, get back in the test team, and it's not the same South African bowlers, but it's an outstanding Indian seam attack, a young Jasprit Bumrah who at different points has the wood over you, one time at Southampton most notably. And it gets really hard for you again almost straight away when you're back in that test team. That must be an awful feeling.
oh, absolutely. You, as a player, again, you go around in circles. You think I've made a change in my job. I've moved away from my best mates to try and further my career. I told one of the coaches I really respect, John Lewis, that I want to move away from him, my best mates. You uproot your life, you buy a new home,
Mm.
and then you have Bumrah, Shami, and Sharma. Wasn't even worried about Ashwin at that point. It was couldn't get to there. Um, but like again, I look back on those memories now, and I laugh. So Graham Onions every year he goes to the level 3 or level 4 ECB coaching
Mm.
program, and they use that video of Bumrah swinging it back onto my left knee in some sort of fast bowling education or umpiring education. Every year I get a video from him giggling away during the presentation. So, and like it makes me laugh now. I look back and I think, I should have enjoyed it more. Because I can still remember that day walking up the stairs, going to Craig and the England physio and getting ice on my knee. But yeah, look, it was hard work. That summer was hot. It was hard. It was put hairs on my chest, which was in hindsight good fun.
And a great series to be part of, I suppose, if you can zoom
Oh yeah,
out and acknowledge the fact that in the final test of it, you got to walk through the gates at the Oval with Alistair Cook, and you had it quite nicely on day one, I recall, and getting the chance to
yeah,
do it with a guy who was a retiring great. You were his opening partner in his final test match.
yeah, absolutely. And to share change room with those guys, Jimmy, Alistair Cook. I mean, I grew up. I mean, not that they're old, but I grew up watching these guys,
Mm.
and now you get to share change room with them at the highest level. And I think towards the back end of that series, I did acknowledge that. I remember walking out that day, sort of just looking around the stadium, and this is absolutely nuts.
Mm.
Like, I'm the guy walking out with Sir, not then, but Sir Alistair Cook, and for what he's achieved in the game, the way he's gone about it, what I want to achieve in the game. But yeah, to be there in those moments was amazing. Man. It kind of takes your breath away at times when you think about actually you were there. Um, and then you've again got to face up to Bumrah, Sharma, and Sharma, and you know the game's on.
I remember I interviewed you the day before that test. I remember
Yeah, I
this.
remember that on
It's
the
because
balcony.
yeah,
At,
at the
yeah,
Oval, right? My
Mm.
recollection was that I think I might have said to the media manager, "I hope he's like going okay," because he had a tough time of it through the series, and it was like, "No,
Mm.
no, he's good. He'll be fine." And you had a big smile on your face, and it felt like even by that point of your career, you'd worked out the bit where I can't be worrying about how many coffee pods are on the shelf. Like
Yeah,
it might have taken you to the very tail end of your time playing for England in England at that point. And there's
yeah.
more to your career that we get to shortly, but like yeah, you had that awakening moment of sorts that I need to find a way to make the most of this experience.
Absolutely, and enjoy hearing Jerusalem walking out.
Yeah.
Like it's because it's every kid's dream, and it's you grow up playing the game because it's fun. You grow up wanting to hit the ball and actually like have some fun doing it, not worrying about which coffee you're going to have because you don't know whether your left foot's there, the right place, and trying to block every ball because every ball's a threat. And
Mm.
and I think that's probably what I've really admired about the current regime. Whether it's right or not, people can disagree, but it has freed people up to actually go and play. And the knock-on effect that's happened on a lot of players, I think, is quite interesting, and
Mm.
how players have kind of incorporated that into their own game and their own mentality. But I think I probably started to make the shift then, whether I had the technique at that point in time and the know-how to actually let it be effective, I don't know. But I definitely started to enjoy it by that point.
There was always the kind of aura around you that smart guy, talks well, could be a captain one day, and like whether that was they gave you that extra run,
Mm,
right? So after it doesn't quite work against India, you play in Sri Lanka and it does work over there, like this vibe that
mm.
this guy might be a subcontinental specialist, which is quite funny when you, as you said yourself, had two or three shots, but a crucial performance in a test win in Gaul. The 46 in the first dig, 146 not out, to make sure of it, essential to a test win. That must have felt so good having got out the other side of the slump. And I know that things don't quite go well after that again, but at least for that one moment in time that you were able to step up and play the way that you needed to make a big contribution for England.
Yeah, absolutely. You away from home. I mean, Sri Lanka is an amazing place to tour. I mean, you've just said you've been there to go. I think it's one of my favorite grounds.
Yeah.
It's the whole place. It's just amazing. It's the food's amazing. The fort. It's a gorgeous setting to go on holiday or to go play cricket. Um, so for me, I love that tour. Obviously, it's a lot better when you're part of a winning environment, and two when you do well personally. First time England's gone there and won 3-0. So to sit and have a beers with all the lads after the series, I had a nice eat in the series, which was amazing. But yeah, look, I mean that series was good fun to play in. What's the name? His name slipped out of my head. Left arm spinner,
Embledenian, was he in there by then?
Harath.
Oh, Harath, right.
Harath,
Yeah, yeah,
his last Test match. Again, another sort of legend of the game that I grew up watching. Now he's running up and bowling to me.
yeah. Mm.
So yeah, look, I mean, it was an amazing time, an amazing series.
And look, you have to do your time in the wilderness, I guess, when you're left out of the England team as you are in early 19. That's just the way it goes. You know, if you drops, you have to go and do your penance and make your bulk runs and all the rest of it. But it's of note that you did nearly make it back into that side just before the pandemic, right? So England scheduled the tour Sri Lanka again. That's the really weird bit where, well, maybe you pick up the story where you got there and before you got a chance to play a game, you were being told that there was a global pandemic and you had to very quickly get back out of the country again. And that meant that there was no test cricket and thus no recall for you.
Yeah, we were actually in Oz with the Lions side. We played 2 games, 2 or 3 game series. We played a game at the MCG,
Hmm.
um, and then we flew from there. I think it was myself, Zach Crawley, maybe Dan Lawrence, and we flew over to Colombo. It was about a week went by, and obviously the cases were rising and rising as testing got better. And then we played day one of a warm-up game, and basically the plug got pulled that day, and we just all got on a plane that night and got shipped home. Everything was still home here, or everything was still open at home, and I think a week later we're in full lockdown and the world went crazy. So yeah, like at the time we weren't overly exposed to it, if that makes sense. We were in our beautiful hotel, one of the most amazing hotels, the Shangri-La in Colombo, um, well looked after. It was absolutely amazing. So we weren't really affected by it. Obviously, you have an understanding that things are going on, and then suddenly you get shipped back on a plane and you realize that it's actually slightly bigger than a test series.
And upon getting home, the world stops, right? I mean, your profession, you go from being nearly opening the batting in a test series to no cricket at all in 2020. And it's of interest to me. I mean, the numbers in your career, it's only one thing. A player's career isn't defined by their numbers, but it's like of interest to me that from 21 onwards, your record is terrific, right? Your average is up above 50 into the 70s in that record breaking season in 2022, which we'll come to in a sec. But I've spoken to a number of players about what COVID meant to them and what they look back on it as. Quite a few of them say some version of, in some respects, it was nice to hit pause and to refresh the batteries and to be able to think about other things in life. I ponder, is that the case for you, that having just some time to just stop, having gone through quite a bit in the previous 3 or 4 years, the ups and downs of the international game, that you personally were well served by just everything just stopping for a while and being able to, I know it wasn't ideal and it's a horrible thing that's going on around you, but just getting a chance at that midway point of your career to do nothing for a while.
To be fair, I've never looked at it like that. The way I felt at the time, it broke me. I was in a two-bed flat, which is an amazing flat. Like, I couldn't knock the flat at all. But I felt so confined.
Right.
Um, really struggled mentally. It was a really tough time where I lost a shed ton of weight. Wasn't eating properly. I was running at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to try and mentally try and run away from problems and try and cope with what I felt like was going on. Couldn't get out. We weren't playing cricket. It was a lot going on in my own head, really. So whether that was the restart button, I don't know. Whether it was actually a forced removal, because that 2020 year, I think we played 5 games. I might have averaged 25. I don't remember sort of getting 100 or doing much that year. Um, but I found COVID really hard work, and maybe the perspective that I got from that, having come out of it, that actually this should be fun. You should be enjoying what you're doing. You should be running around, diving, catching, doing your your job in inverted commas to the most happy ability, rather than like stressing about every little thing. Because I'm always going to be on the over prepared side rather than the under prepared. So actually, maybe that's the perspective that it gave me, having gone through a sort of really tough period during it.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So it's the very opposite of what I'm saying there. With some players are
Yeah.
like, oh, gee, just can just chill out for a bit. You found it difficult in other ways to to process what was going on around you, like with the over exercising and all the rest of it. Have you had a chance
Mm.
to? I mean, was that something that provided pause for thought with the club and involvement of team psychologists and that type of thing, or did you kind of find your own way back to where you needed to be?
Uh, no, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I'm really bad in the sense of I don't anything that's going on in my own head when I arrive at the ground, I'm there to do a job,
Mm,
and I know I'm one of the senior lads. I need to apply myself. I need to do the right thing for the team. So I didn't let any of that sort of affect me. In inverted commas, when I was at work, I was happy. Nobody would have known any different.
mm,
To the club, it was my skinnies were dropping, my physical performance was going up. I had the best physical metrics I ever had. I was really low 30s on the skin fold test. Don't know if you have any sort of idea of that, but it's really skinny. I'm probably 10 kilos heavier now than I was then, so I'm healthy. Um, but at that point in time, my metrics were going the right way in terms of physical output.
mm,
But we weren't playing cricket to judge where you are, if that makes sense.
mm, mm.
Um, I can't sit still at the best of times. We got back from Spain at 1 a.m. Me and my wife went up to the lakes yesterday evening. We went for a walk yesterday. Got back. I've scarified the grass. We've fixed the leak. It's so I don't sit still at the best of times. But yeah, so I think just being captive, I think gave me a real perspective on actually just go and enjoy what you're doing because it's not going to last forever.
Mm, You sound like me. I'm not good with
Y-
idle hands.
Terrible,
I'm running around doing all sorts when I've got
terrible.
theoretical spare time. Um,
Yep.
I remember doing a game that you played in and did so nicely in 2021, a Roses game against Yorkshire, where you hit a lovely 100. It was a bit of a breakthrough 100 too, having been a while between
Yeah.
centuries. And again, going back to what I mentioned before about that being a turning point of sorts, that's when things start to really start firing again, and a moment in your career which I'm sure you look back on as a little bit of a turning point where you're able to post three figures, raise your bat, and start again.
Yeah, absolutely. And funny enough, the bit I remember of that day was, or that game, we all sat around in in the grass afterwards, down on the
Mm.
ground, um, boys just having beers and chatting, and I remember sort of sitting having a glass of red wine with Woody, and it was just those moments for me where you've contributed towards a match that you've won as a team. I think that's the bit that I really enjoy. So I don't necessarily remember the 100. I don't actually remember the moment of getting 100 or how it happened, but it was that moment afterwards. I can still remember the conversation going around the lads, that I find really enjoyable. And I can remember so many occasions where you've done badly and you have like a bashing from each other and from the coach or whoever it is. And actually, those really nice moments. And you asked about the difference between T20 and 4-day cricket. I can't remember a lot of T20 games where you've done really well and you've won the game and you sit round because it's almost like the day's past and it's next. Where that 4-day game and the next 4-day game, and you think like, right, how did this happen? You're chatting, and I can remember so many of those moments.
It was the first week back with crowds, wasn't it? I've got very fond memories of that
Yep,
week. Watching you guys sit out there, yeah, having a few beers after you'd won. It was a great
yep,
final day. Parkinson and Sakib both taking
yep,
wickets at the end and getting it done with, I don't know, half an hour to spare or something like that. You're right. Like,
yep. And it was
no one,
hot as well. It was
hot,
really
wasn't
hot.
it?
I loved
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
Great week. And yeah, playing obviously a decisive role yourself earlier in the game to set it up for Lancs and get the Roses win, of course, over the old enemy and that type of
absolutely.
thing. And I know that Lancs don't go on to win the thing in 21, but I mean, the way in which you personally build into 22, and it's one of those enormous record breaking seasons like the one we referred to earlier, where you post over 1,200 runs at 72, 5 centuries, the triple against Somerset, which is the fourth highest score in Lancashire history, and that 199 against Surrey to finish the season, which I was also up there doing that game. And remember that as well. We'd priced in that you'd moved to double hundred the next day and just fell one run short, but it didn't matter because of course you'd already played that role. So again, that idea of putting yourself, I guess, back on the radar. That from an
Mm,
England perspective, that England had this remarkable year in 2022. And just a
yeah.
reminder, there's this guy out there, this tall, classy left-hander that he's ready to roll if required.
Yeah, I suppose I look back, I didn't have England on my mind at that point in time. I
Right.
think it was, for me, it was quite straightforward. Your currency runs the way you, one, get picked, you perform, you stay in a job. If
Mm.
you don't score runs, you don't take wickets, you're gone. I know that's really harsh, but I think that's the bottom line with the game. Um, and that season, I loved playing. I remember the weather being good. I remember playing good cricket, feeling good. Um, and it was, I don't look back thinking, wow, I'm getting close to getting picked for England. It was, I'm actually just enjoying playing my cricket,
Mm.
which I've felt the last 2 years since. So I think that's maybe my key, but I suppose it's always easy when things go well, when things go sort of the other side of it, and it's how you manage that.
True, but I mean, even with those bumper seasons, you're going to fail more than you succeed, right? The nature of batting. So it's being
Absolutely.
more at peace with failure. Would you think that might be a
Correct.
part of it? Yeah, right. Nice. And look,
Yeah.
even when I mean, you do get the call up, right? You do go to Pakistan,
Yeah.
and Ben Duckett gets the spot, not you. And I guess the rest is history for Ben, who's enjoyed
Mm.
a really nice time as a Test cricketer, enjoying quite a bit of success in the last couple of years. But you don't stop. I mean, get the captaincy in 23. The only unfortunate bit there is that on 189 not out early in the season to a hammy and lose a lot of the 23 campaign in recuperation. So I guess a very frustrating time, or I don't guess I know, a very frustrating time for you to pick up an injury when you were again at the peak of your powers.
Yeah. The bit I remember of that game as well, it was just before the new ball, and I tried to get face more balls to try and get through the new ball because I think we're 5 or 6 down, and so we needed to try and get ahead quickly. Obviously, that new ball was going to potentially do some damage. And I remember facing Leachy, thinking in my head I'd picked my foot up and taken a step, and I hadn't moved my foot. Um, so yeah, that was really frustrating. I think the next 40 days from there, I did sort of an hour's worth of contrast baths every day,
Mm.
looked at my diet, looked at just every little bit I could just to try and get back. It was quite a big injury. The physio wanted me to get back in 12 weeks. I think I came back in 9. Would have been 8 weeks if it wasn't for him. But yeah, I mean, our medical staff are unreal. I mean, Sam Byrne he's a 6'8", massive Australian angel. He's an absolute belter. Um, but yeah, that was really frustrating. I didn't play a T20 game that year. And then actually, I think it was nearly 2 years or 18 months to the day that I hadn't played a T20 game. So last season when I played my first one, I sat down, I looked at Wellesley and I went, man, I'm crapping myself. Like, I haven't done this for 2 years. Like, what do we do?
It's quite relatable, I think, for to get thrown back in that and think, Christ, it's like
Yeah,
being that kid that we spoke about, at the start. And look, even last year, right? You still end up with 1,000 run season, and I know that Lancs go down, and you won't look back at the
yeah,
season with joy because as captain of the club, you've been relegated. But at the end of that campaign, they've signed you up for 5 years, right? Like
yeah.
you are their long term planning, you are their long term standard bearer, which in some respects brings us to today, doesn't it? Like whether like what the journey has in store for you next.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned the McCullum regime before about how it liberates players. Like, do you sort of feel a bit of that Bazball energy pulsing through you? Maybe not as far as trying to score a strike rate of 80 or 90 or whatever it is in Test cricket, but the vibe of what he's trying to do, that actually suits your personality quite well now you're at this stage of your career.
Yeah, I think it's probably pushed my game on a little bit as well. I think my mentality's probably changed from survive the new ball to try and put pressure back,
Mm.
try and actually score runs. Look, I've always tried to, whatever game I'm playing, I try to win the game. I try to play in a fashion that would allow the team the best chance to win that game. Sometimes you have to block out the first session. Sometimes you have to try and take it down. It's all just sort of dependent on what the scenario is. Whether that's Bazball or not, it's up to Stokesy and Baz to decide. That's out of my hands. I'm a Lancs cricketer. I'm enjoying playing my cricket. We've got a really young squad, which has its own challenges. I think our average age of output a team last year was 23.
Mm.
So it was challenging in itself. This year could be similar depending on if there's injuries, which is, in a way, it's good. They're all local lads and they're all lads that have come up through the academy system. We just need to try and make sure that by the time they get to 25, 26, they don't have the sort of mental scarring that some of the older lads did at that point.
And provides you now with the chance to be one of the senior bods around the dressing room and try and help develop some players, which as a captain, of course, but as a senior player with plenty of miles on the clock and plenty of runs on the board, that gives you the chance to make a real contribution there.
Yeah, absolutely. To be fair, I was chatting to George Balderson, who's now
Mm.
24, about this the other day. And I was saying to him, you go from being the young cricketer to being the old cricketer very quickly. You kind of have that 2 year in between from like 26 to 28 of floundering a little bit, and then suddenly you the experienced campaigner, and then 3 years later you're old. So yeah, look, I had a good giggle. A few of the older boys travelled in jeans as well this week, and a few of the younger lads walked past to see. Look, all the dads are travelling in jeans. So thankfully I wasn't in jeans, but all Wellesley and the other guys were. So, but look, it's a really cool environment to be in at the minute. It's young, it's fresh. Obviously, as an older lad, you see things a lot earlier than some of the other lads would. Um, just by nature of being around for a period of time. But then I also think back when Benke was 37 and I was 18 and fresh faced and naive, I'm sure he looked at me and thought, geez, you're so wet behind the ears. So you try and put yourself in the younger lad's shoes and just try and give him what he needs at that point in time.
And you get to a really good place as a human being in the game at this point too, right? So if England comes again, or if it doesn't come again, it's not going to change the way you see yourself as a human being, right? Like you've got more substance to draw down on, and it'll mean that no matter what happens in life after cricket, you'll be proud of what you've achieved.
100%. I think when I look back on my career, England and both for Lance and Durham. I've loved it. I mean, I could retire today and be very happy.
Mm,
I'm playing because I want to win and want to compete. If England came knocking, awesome, cool, absolutely, I'd play. I think Burnsy said it in the press the other day. Absolutely, he'd play. It's
mm.
playing for England is every kid's dream. It's you want to wear your country's colours and go out and represent them and on the world stage. Absolutely. If it doesn't, cool. I'm quite happy. I think as a player, I've got better since the last few years. I'm not going to overly change in the next few years. I am who I am at 32. I think I try and develop consistently, but I'm not going to suddenly start batting right hand and whacking it out the ground. You just slowly sort of try and make incremental changes that allow you to be better. But no, look, I think the big thing for me is I'm enjoying playing and hopefully I don't drop too many off Jimmy. Otherwise, that enjoyment could disappear quite quickly.
Well, you've got time on your side, obviously a very good head on your shoulders, lots of experience, and you've already done so much in the game. But very best of luck for season 2025. May it have thousands of runs and tons in store for you and for Lancs, and you're going to continue to enjoy it as much as you have the last couple of years. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers, and thank you for having me, Matt.